Welcome back to the Literacy Lunch Break. I'm your host, Marjorie Botari, and I am excited to continue to talk about literacy wins in the classroom. Today we have Elaine Peters, a kindergarten teacher, joining us, and we are so excited to hear about her year and her literacy wins. Lisa, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We would love to hear just a little background about yourself, what got you started in education, and really what got you passionate about what you're doing now. You have a very large social media presence as well that we've been following, and we get to see some of those wins, but we would love to hear a little bit about what got you to where you are now.
Of course. Thank you for having me on here. I have been in education for 13 years, in and out. I am currently a kindergarten teacher right now, and I've been in kindergarten for 3 years, and I don't know if I'll ever leave. It's just, this might sound silly, but I feel like it's like the most magical place to be.
Oh.
You see the kids come in, it's most of their like first schooling experience. And so they're like open eyes, open heart, they're just ready for everything. So it's so fulfilling every day. So I think I'm a kindergarten teacher for the rest of my life. What got me into education is at first, I think I was just following the steps. Both of my parents are retired military, but then they both went into education. My sister is an elementary teacher. So I think I was just like following the family brand kind of thing. But it didn't take long. Like once I was in it, it just felt right. I don't know. I hope everyone gets to experience that just when this is what I'm supposed to be doing kind of thing.
I love that you said that. I don't mean to jump in, but my husband and I actually talk about this quite often, is being able to do something that you're actually passionate about, where not, and you make such a difference and you get to see that difference. So I think, we know how hard teaching is. And that's why we really wanted to do this series is talking about the wins as well, because there are so many shifts. There's so much to learn. I think, teaching right now can be uncomfortable for many of us, especially if we've been teaching a long time. But exactly what you said is to be able to make that difference and to see that impact. Not everybody gets to do that. And we spend most of our lives, at our jobs. So being able to make that difference is so impactful.
Yeah, they really do become like your second family. I probably see my kids more than my actual family during the school.
I believe it.
Yeah. And then something that really stuck with me, I have been told you are most qualified to teach the person that you used to be. And when I was growing up, I couldn't read. Like I was in remedial reading, writing, spelling. I needed all the help. I hated it because I was not confident. I opened a book and I didn't know what it said. So I didn't want to do it. So knowing that I have this opportunity to set a solid foundation right when they enter my door it's humbling, and like I take it so serious. Like I'm like, no, these kids are going to leave so confident and so many tools in their toolbox that the next couple of years are going to be a breeze. So that is my goal. And I think about that almost every day. Like think of you when you were this age and how just not confident and not happy or excited I was. And so it's like my goal to build that up before they leave my door. So
that's so powerful. I think, what you just said, sometimes in professional learning, or if you're taking a class, they'll often be like, do you remember how you learned to read? And anybody that really just learned to read easily and didn't have any challenges, what the answer is always like, I don't know, I just did it. Right. Yeah. But then when it was a little bit more challenging, it's like, no, I remember how challenging it was. And I remember why. And I think that's the power of recognizing that there is a science behind this. There are specific skills that we need to teach. There are certain ways that we need to be teaching these skills. And, if that it's easy to forget if you don't really remember that process and you think it kind of happened naturally. So I think that's powerful to come back and remember that.
Absolutely.
Your students are so lucky to have you. As we think about, again, this series, really talking about those wins, I would love for you to share any specific wins or, really big impacts that you've seen. And I know you, as you said, you've been teaching for, did you say 13 years? So I'm sure you've had plenty of wins, but, more recently, is there anything that you've implemented or any shifts or changes that you've made last year, this year, where you're starting to see that impact in students?
Right. I think once I understood, like, there are two roads, and it's like the phonological awareness and the letters and sounds. And once you master those two roads and they meet, the kids start reading, and then you can enter the vocabulary and the comprehension. And it's these two roads, which is why I love kindergarten so much. It's building these two roads so solid. And when they hit, like, you see it happen. And like the kids, like, I just blended the word, or I just read that whole sentence, and they don't even like, and they don't even like realize how big of a deal it is. Like, of course they're
Yeah.
excited, but I'm like, no, like, you're reading. Like the first time they like blend a word, I'm like, y'all are readers, y'all are reading. So it's those little things, just like mastering the letter sounds and the phonological awareness, and seeing those two roads meet. It's just
Mm.
amazing. A lot of movement, a lot of storytelling, a lot of bringing background knowledge. I kind of adjust with whoever's in my class that year and kind of like go off of that to relate it back to what the letters and the sounds and stuff like that. So
That's excellent. And I
yeah,
love that you mentioned depending on who you have in your classroom this year, right? So I think that's what it's so important about those two roads that you talked about, where we know this is what students need. And yes, it might look a little bit different of where we're started, or how much repetition maybe we need,
right,
or how much practice we may need, but those roads don't change, right? It's just a little
right,
bit, maybe again, a little more support, a little less support.
right.
So as you've been making, these clear roads and you've been teaching this, what have you noticed in your students, as maybe, let me back that up, in previous years, have you always taught this way, that all 13
No,
years that you've taught, have you always
no,
had this solid understanding? And then,
no, no, no.
if you started to make that shift, what would be the difference that you've seen as you think about that success and that impact?
Right. I think having the science of reading, understanding, and all those trainings. My husband makes fun of me. Like, I will buy textbooks and I will read them like someone's reading their favorite like Nicholas Sparks book. But I'm like, oh my gosh, like I never thought about this before. And he's like, okay. I'm like overly excited about it. But I think it's just like the digging deep and just like learning as much as I can, because the more like I'm finding aha moments where I'm like, why did I never like
Hmm.
piece those two things together? Why did I not think of that? Like, it seems so obvious. And so I just feel like the more I learn, even better everything will get. And so just I have noticed the more eager I am, I feel like the more eager they are, because I can share more. They see my excitement. Like sometimes they're like, Miss Peters, but like you're smiling, you're talking really fast. I'm like, oh, sorry. Like I just get so excited about but yeah, there's definitely, and I feel like that's with any profession and any teacher, just through the years, you're just naturally going to get more confident, you're going to get more
Hmm.
knowledgeable, and you'll see it in your students.
Yes, definitely. So at you mentioned the excitement that you have, and then how in turn your students see that. And that's one of the things we really wanted to chat about in this series as well, is these literacy wins, and then, creating that classroom environment that really allows our students to do hard work. You have kindergarten students, and as you mentioned, you may have some coming in that, do have some background with language and the alphabet and phonemic awareness, and you may have some that don't. And so how do you create an environment where you're able to meet the needs of a variety of learners, but also really able to make this a safe place to learn,
Right.
allowing students to take risks or do hard work? Because this is not, our brains weren't naturally wired to do this, right? So we have to help our students understand that this is a lot of work and really help them be invested in that.
Right.
So I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
So when I started kindergarten, like I would say the first couple months, I'm like, why am I struggling so hard on this? And like, it sounds so cliche, but like, it just hit me. I'm like, why am I trying to reinvent the wheel right now? Like,
Yes.
every human wants to be seen. They want to be heard. They want to be loved. They want to know that you care. So I think that is the foundation of everything. Like if you don't have that, then it's hard to teach a child. Like they have to know that you care before they know, or before you can tell them how much you know. Like they care about how much you care more. And so just laying that formation, we do a lot of conversations about what that looks like though. One thing we do in my classroom is like we have to cheer each other on. So like If someone sounds out a word, like we're going to hype them up. And we do this cute little thing. So I'm just going to say Sally. So Sally says the word spelling correct. So I say, what do we tell Sally when she's doing great? And then my whole class goes, Sally, you're doing great. And then we all clap. And it could be the easiest, simplest thing. If I know that child has never told me that M says and they just
Mm.
answered it, stop the class. What do
Yes.
we tell? You know, just so they feel, and you can see it on their face. Like the first time that happens to them, they're like, oh, like my whole class is cheering me on. And then I'll forget to do it sometimes. And they're like, Miss Peters, what do we tell so and I'm like, yes,
Yes.
like class, thank you. So just creating that kind of thing. And then the growth mindset, we talk a lot about that. I talk so much about who knows how to ride a bike. Most of them raise their hand. Did you get on and just ride and go? I had to think about it for a second.
Mhm.
No, I'm like, no, you have to keep pedaling. Every step matters. Like jump in a pool. Do you know how to swim? No. So the practice every single day, it adds up. And then you get on the bike and you just ride it and you don't think about it anymore. And I was like, that's what we're trying to get to, kind of thing.
I love that. That you growth mindset wise, absolutely, right? Helping students understand that we're not born knowing how to do everything and that we're going to learn and mistakes actually help us learn. Um, but I also love that from the impact of helping our students. And I think this is something that we don't talk about enough, but I think is so critical is cluing our students into the work that's happening in our brains, right? Like this
Right.
is hard. This is a process that you're going to learn. This isn't something that you learn how to do just automatically. And
Right.
so we're going to do this in steps. And some kiddos might get on that bike and they might only have to practice or fall 3 times, where some might need to fall, 10 or 15 times. But the if you put the work in and if you follow those steps, you're going
Right.
to learn to ride the bike.
Right. So sometimes I make mistakes on purpose, make mistakes. And I instead of just being like, oh man, like I make sure I talk out like what is happening in my brain out loud. Like, oh, I misspelled this word. Let's go back. That's okay. That's okay. I can fix it. And so kind of like modeling how to make a mistake and that it's okay to happen. So I feel like them seeing that also makes a big impact on them too.
So when you think about your students, previous to the way you're teaching reading now, what are the big differences that you see? Not only in their growth or the impact in, their literacy knowledge, but also
Mhm.
in their attitudes towards reading.
It's they're so more like so more cut that out. They're just so much more excited to do the work. I feel like when I wasn't so confident in my teaching, I feel like, I mean, they didn't know. They didn't go home and say, Miss Peter doesn't
Right.
know what they're talking about. They don't know. They didn't know how to like say it, but I do feel like they felt it. And when I go in so confidently and I'm able to answer their questions when it comes up, well, wait, we heard this sound and you just told us that it's this sound or
Yes.
this letter, like I'm able to follow through with an answer. And so they're not left with, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like
Hmm.
you couldn't get, you know what I mean? So being confident and having the knowledge that I do now, I feel like goes back to them and they're more confident in the language, learning it. They're like, oh,
Yes.
okay, Miss Peters has an answer. She just told us why we're hearing instead of when she just told me. So I think that is the biggest transfer right there is the knowledge that they're getting. And they're not necessarily thinking, oh, like she knows everything, but I know it's building confidence in them,
Mhm.
knowing I didn't say, oh, I don't know. And I was able to give them an answer.
And I love that you brought that up because we do talk about that all of the time. And I remember, back when I taught first grade, and it was a long time ago. But where I would tell students, oh, that's just a rule breaker. That yeah, we just learned this, but yeah, that one doesn't make sense. And never back then was I thinking, well, what I'm basically telling students is everything I'm teaching you doesn't really matter because you're going to come across a word, and then I'm going to tell you that one doesn't make sense. And
Mm.
so when I think back to that back then, I was like, wow, I was really teaching students to not use the skills that we were practicing and probably just, rely on context or pictures or really start to guess at a lot of words because we were actually telling them this language doesn't make sense. And
It's
so
complicated. Yeah.
now,
Yeah.
when you come across a sound or like, why, I have my kiddos are older now, fifth and eighth grade, but when they were younger, I had one friend who would text me all the time. She's like, okay, her son was a rule follower. So she's like, they learned this today, this
Mhm.
long vowel pattern, but in this word, this is saying that, and he wants to know why. And then I would like text back and she's like, okay, thank you. And I was like, goodness, this is so important because it also makes them curious, right? Like,
Right.
this letter or these letters can stand for these sounds, but
Yeah.
there's more coming, or and then if they discover something, then it's
Hmm.
exciting. And it's not, wait, this isn't saying the same sound, nothing makes sense. It's, this isn't saying the same sound that I learned. I
Right.
wonder why.
Yes. And they're able
Yeah.
to question that. And they're
Hmm.
even, what's really cool, and that you're like, oh, they're excited about this because they'll come in the next day and we're like, I told my mom about da 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 roll and they didn't even know about it. And I'm like,
Oh, they have to feel so nice,
nice.
right?
Yes. And they're like, I taught my mom, I can't think of what the sounds of Y are. And like, she didn't know that. And so they're so proud of themselves,
Yes.
to say that they went home and taught their parents and stuff like that. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Like you said, kindergarten is also such a fun age, but also really, I give you so much credit because I remember the way they come in and then the way they leave at the end of the year and you're like,
Yes.
and we're starting
It's
back. Yeah.
completely like I wish you could set up a camera of just the first week. And then I remember my first day of kindergarten. I remember looking at my partner teacher and being like, what did I like, why what? Like they're rolling, like literally
Yes.
rolling on the carpet. And I'm like, oh, can I do this?
Hmm.
But like I said, place here for a reason. It didn't take me very long to
Yeah.
realize like this is where I'm meant to be.
And so what are some of the things you do to keep them engaged? Because as you said, especially in the beginning of the year, they're rolling around on the carpet. Their attention span is short. So what are some ways that you're able to, keep them engaged and weave literacy throughout the day?
I think knowing your students and knowing your class, and obviously in the very beginning, you're not going to know exactly what that looks like. Planning short little sections with movement in between. I love Heggerty because the whole time they are moving. So they don't
Hmm.
even realize that they have been sitting for 5 to 10 minutes because they're roller coastering and they're doing everything and they're having fun. So they don't realize they're just sitting and a lot of movement. I try to, like I said, a lot of storytelling. I have them get up and act out some of the things. Like if we're learning WH digraph, I'm just saying that because we did that today. Instead of just saying WH says the sound, I have them come up and I'm like, W talks so much that doesn't give you a chance to talk. And then they act it out. And I'm like, but if the ooh sound comes after, then you finally get your chance to talk and we act it out and story tell. And then they're able to go and have them turn and talk to their partners. And that's so much movement and play role and acting out. And like, it sounds so silly, but they know it. Like they know it right away because they're like yelling at me. They're like, that's the one that did this or kind of thing. When we learned the what was it? C, the sight word C. I had twins in my class this year, and I was like, oh, come here, come here. And so they
Like,
came up, and I
yes.
put yes, I put an E on one, and I put an E on the other. I go, do they look the same? And they're like, yes. And I go, but they're still E. And so every time they see EE, they're like, that's, I don't want to say their names, but
Yeah.
that's da 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 da. And so and I go, and what does it say? E. So just like vibing off of your classroom and using
Mhm.
what's in your room and having those characters come up and play the letters. So just a lot of movement and storytelling. I go such a long way.
Yes, I love the connections that you're making for them too, right? You're just making it more concrete by connecting it,
Right. Yeah.
and helping them relate to it. I love
Yes.
that. Well, I always like to ask our guests before we wrap up, if you have anyone listening to this podcast, whether it's an educator, a teacher, an administrator, and they're really trying to think about literacy differently, right? And again, this series is really celebrating those wins. And we know, as you mentioned, the work that you're doing, the books that you're reading, the constant learning that it takes to start
Mhm.
to make shifts. Um, if they're just starting on that journey, and they just had to pick one small thing to take away, what's the one piece of advice you would
Mhm.
give them? I know that's a hard question,
Yeah.
but just I like to ask it to just maybe make it manageable for anybody that's starting to make those shifts.
Mm.
I had to tell myself this too. Be uncomfortable, or sorry, be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like it's so easy to, well, this is what I always done, or this is what I learned in college, or when presented something new and it seems so off the rails and stuff, just give it a try. And so sometimes when I'm like, the other teachers are like, you're teaching digraphs in October? Like, what? And I'm like, but I'm not just sitting there telling them this is the sounds, like
Mm-hmm.
storytelling. And when it naturally comes up into the sentences in the books, like just explaining it, not expecting mastery, but just that early exposure. So I would just say be open to new ways because the science that is coming, like it's proven that it works.
Mm-hmm.
And you and your kids will be better for it. So
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much for being a guest today. And thank you so much for doing the amazing work you're doing in your classroom and then sharing it for all of your followers as well.
thank you for having me.
Be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for our upcoming episodes where we explore literacy topics in a snack-sized, easily digestible format.